Welcome to the third TTG Conversations webinar on preparing for the post-COVID-19 world. With no certainty on when the pandemic will end, how should we be planning international meetings and large global and regional events? What factors need to be in place for the MICE industry to grow again? Here to take lead on today's discussion with our distinguished panel is moderator Hugo Slimbrouck, Global Director of Strategic Partnerships from Ovation Global DMC. He's also CITES Global Past President and Past Chair of JMIC. Over to you, Hugo.
Good afternoon and good morning to everybody. I hope for those that were online a few minutes ago, you enjoyed live performance from David Bowie at Glastonbury in the year 2000. Under pressure, the name of the game for all of us the last few months. So under this theme, we are preparing for the post-COVID-19 world. And on behalf of TTG, we have gathered a number of speakers today to take us through a journey on how we see the future. What can you expect today? Trying to get to the next slide here. Sorry for this. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, this is the structure of the session today. The next hour, we will be going through three major themes. The pivoting to new meeting design models based on neuroscience. We will look at the delivering hospitality post-COVID-19, and we will look at changes for events and incentive travel towards a new normal as of today. If you have any questions, you can put the questions in the chat box, and me and the members of the panel will be responding to them throughout the session. So, who do we have here today? David Sand is Group CEO of Iwin International in South Africa. David is not only working in South Africa, but has offices in Europe and Asia as well. Secondly, we have Avinash Chandarana. Avinash is Global Learning and Development Director of the MCI Group, and he's calling in from Hong Kong. And then we have Stefan van den Ouwelen, Chief Hospitality Group Officer of Asset Worldwide Corporation, who are managing a whole bunch of fantastic hotels in Thailand, and he's calling in from Bangkok. Myself, I'm Hugo Slimbrouck, and I was just introduced very properly. So, what have we seen in the last few months? First of all, many people sick, many people that have died. And instead of being an incentive, traveling to a destination has become a life-threatening risk. So disasters like this, pandemics, 9/11, and so forth, our industry has always lived through it, and through after this disruption, always stood up again. But this one is taking long, and is taking longer. And we are wondering if the resilience will take us through to the end of this year or next year. There's positive signs. There's also some negative signs still around there. So we are really eager to learn more about this. UNWTO has made many predictions, but recently I was also speaking to some of the agencies handling meetings and events, and these are the major trends that we have seen in the last month. First trend is the trend of waiting. People are waiting to decide. They're waiting longer than normally because of financial risk. They're waiting to plan the meeting or to change the date of the meeting again. At this moment, we're seeing bookings for Q4 and early 2021. The second thing that we see is that the hybrid online option has been taken more and more. And some events have transited completely to online sessions. What have we learned from that? We have learned that there's positives and negatives. And our next speaker will take us through that in just a moment. And then we're seeing as well that the DMOs convention bureaus are really kicking off with campaigns attracting new visitors, new conferences, meetings, and incentives into their destination. Ready or not, the campaigns are there, and we have questions about that as well. So, without further ado, I would like to present Avinash Chandarana. Avinash is the Group Learning and Development Director in the MCI Group. Avinash, do you want to take it from here?
Great, yes, thank you, Hugo. Hello and everyone, welcome to the session. Pleasure to have a few minutes with you just to share with you some of the challenges that we're facing, of course, as we are pivoting to virtual in terms of the event industry, and what are the elements that we've learned from adult learning, from neuroscience, in terms of how can we design effective online engaging experiences. So I think that's really the goal for the next few minutes. And let me just take you through that. So first of all, remember these wonderful days, the good old days? This is exactly what we used to do quite often, right? It's nostalgic for us, moving from the physical world to the digital world. There's a lot of anxiety, of course, but we've also, have we actually transitioned from this kind of situation, for example, and are we being threatened to also move into this situation where actually, hopefully, most of you right now, even though it's early on in the session, remain attentive and remain engaged. This is part of our challenge, right? Moving from physical to virtual, how do we keep the level of attention and engagement high? So moving from physical space to cyberspace, is it really a cut, copy and paste? No, not necessarily. There are some common denominators that we think about, that we have to think about when we think of event and meeting design, but there's quite a lot of differences when we want to create an effective online experience. So why is it that most online sessions or events or conferences in the virtual world crash and burn? What are the lessons that we've learned based on research, based on expertise? Well, there's several things we can think about. First of all, there's low energy. In the online space, like right now, I'm speaking to a screen. I don't have any stimuli from the venue itself or the people around me, from the smells, the sounds, etc., of a physical environment. So low energy is a big challenge. The technical issues, of course, are also a challenge. By default, digital is not easy, and there are tech issues that are in place. But also, when we think about content itself and the structure of content, how our presenters are adapting their content and delivering online is also different. And are they really adapting to the online world? Distraction. And distraction is another one, by the way. And right now, for example, there's a slight distraction that I'm hearing because there's, for example, maybe people are not muted. So in case you haven't muted your microphones, please go ahead and do that. So that's an example of how we can be distracted in many different ways, right, in the online space. But all of these things we know, we're multitasking. You can be looking at your phone. You have kids or animals or pets around, children entering the doorway, you know, when you're online in an interview, for example. We know attention spans are also very challenging. In general terms, even in the physical space, attention spans, you know, pretty much are dropping after 10 minutes. But I would argue that in the online space, attention spans drop within the space of 3 to 4 minutes. I think that's part of our challenge. But the number one challenge that we have is engagement. And I think, Stefan, if you could just mute your microphone because we can hear you actually pouring a drink, I think maybe that's what you are. So if you can mute, that would be great. Thank you, Stefan. There you go. That was the noise I heard in the background. So engagement, again, distractions, right? That's exactly what's going on here. Are you engaged right now? This is the number one thing that's a challenge of the online space. So I'm going to share with you 3 ideas, 3 ingredients through neuroscience principles that will help you effectively design online experiences that will hopefully increase the level of engagement. The first one is structure. What do we learn from neuroscience? But also what do we learn in general is that we have way too much content for the brain to actually assimilate. Way too much content, with too much content in our cart, that's a big problem. So the tip number 1 is to break content into bite-sized chunks. Can we splice it and dice it into these small pieces that allow us to integrate into the long-term memory, which is what it's all about. Because what's the point if you forget content very, very quickly? And we'll talk about forgetting just a little bit later. The magic number here to break content down is 3. Why is that the case? Because think about marketing, communications, brands, all these products that promote themselves, they actually use things in 3s, like reduce, reuse, recycle. What about this brand? Just do it. It's 3 words. It's not 2 words. It's not 4 words. It's 3 words. It sticks in the brain. So let's look at this for a second. Take just a few seconds to look at these 18 characters on the screen and see if you can remember them. Okay, 5 seconds. Can you remember them? Probably not. Look at this. Same character, slightly different though in order. Does that make a bit more sense right now? Maybe. If I then do this to put color to it, look what happens. You can see some correlation or some similarities here in those letters. And now if I do this, all of a sudden, we've actually categorized it into three main areas. Putting things into chunks and categorizing it is great for the brain. If you take a content, for example, of a speaker, typically it's 45 to 60 minutes. But can we actually blend it? Can we cut it down? And can we have interaction? Questions, polling, quizzes, and making it 20, 25 minutes maximum. That's a great way to go in the online space. So structure is extremely important. What about memory? What do we know about memory when it comes to neuroscience? We also know that we forget very quickly. I mentioned it earlier. How much we forget in 24 hours? You'll be shocked. 60 to 70% based on research back in the late 1800s. If you forget that much, what's the point of actually even doing presentations? So what can we do to try and change that? Well, instead of having that massive content, can we cut it into, again, smaller pieces, but can we now space it out over a period of time? Who's to say that you have to do 8 hours of content in one day? Can you break it up and have several days, several afternoons, shorter sessions? Space it will allow the brain again to assimilate, to recall and retain that information far easier. So for example, here's an example of a virtual event. It's not all about webinars. 90% of what's happening right now are webinars. What about creating a virtual event over time? And by repurposing that digital content, make it into micro pieces, space it after the event, for example, will help actually increase what we call the forgetting curve. So from that 60 to 70%, if we space content, we can actually increase the whole level of retention, which I think is extremely important when we think about content. And finally, I want to end on emotions. Can you actually make experiences online emotional? Well, believe it or not, the way we think with our brain is that emotion trumps rational thinking. Think about it. The way you choose your partner, your husband, your wife, who you vote for, what you buy is driven by emotion. Then you rationalize it with decision-making, rational thinking. So ultimately, we talk about all of this is happening in the limbic system in the brain. This is where powerful emotions are created through the production of neurochemicals like cortisol, like dopamine. That's the feel-good chemical. For example, when you're on Facebook or Twitter, people like what you do, like what you post and share it. That's a dopamine rush. Can we create that in the online world? Yes, we can. Multi-sensory experiences. There are many ways of doing that. One of them is to make sure you craft your content into storytelling. Storytelling is powerful for evoking emotion. Using powerful visuals, it really does trigger the emotions as well. And ultimately, believe it or not, you can also create a sense of smell. There's a lot of examples out there where we can get our online attendees actually to even go around smelling things around them. We can deliver food. We can actually have them smell things. And all of a sudden, they're triggering the emotions in the senses through smell. And there are many other examples of that. So that was a very, very high level, quick run through of how neuroscience principles and how we can influence online design through brain-based principles. And that's really what we were talking about here. Hugo, over to you.
Thank you, Avinash, for this. We're a slide too far there already, so if you can go back one slide. We're not going to Stefan yet. I have some questions for Avinash. Avinash, we have seen many examples in the group recently. Only 2 weeks ago, in Stockholm, a meeting that was planned for the Swedish Association of Companies for 300 people was turned completely into a virtual experience, and 13,000 people in Sweden participated in it. Last year, your group, MCI Group, has organized 150 digital events throughout the year already before COVID. Last night, we had a huge blockchain event in Toronto that was originally planned as a gala dinner that you turned into a TV show experience with a much bigger audience again. With holograms, Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty experiences, and so forth. Is this something that is going to stay? Do we have a complete pivot of the meetings and events industry? What are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I personally believe, yes, it is going to stay. Of course, I think we all yearn for those days of that human, and it's going to come back, the human interaction, the whole relationship building on site. I mean, nothing can really replace that. But I think what's important, Hugo, here is that digital is now augmenting that experience of meetings and events. And I think that behavior change is going to stay. It's actually allowing us to increase the value in the future of what we can do by augmenting with digital, what we can do to the on the offline experience. So of course, we're talking about scalability as one example. It's about using digital in very creative ways, for example, to engage a much larger audience. And indeed, let's face it, there's a lot of people from a financial point of view, from a time point of view, can't actually travel to physical events when they do come back, hopefully at scale. But we know the future is moving towards hybrid. So I don't see digital going away at all. If anything, we've just got to learn to embrace it. And we've got to be much better in terms of how we shape the digital experience. And as I said, augment the offline experience.
But don't you think that face-to-face meetings are still essential to build and engage and interact with the network?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't discount face-to-face at all. Just because we're in this current temporary situation of having to shift to virtual 100%, slowly things are going to come back. And it will be the hybrid world, as we say, the physical mapped with the digital online experiences. So what you say, I do believe strongly in that we need to have that physical presence. It might be smaller for quite some time. And who knows, will we ever go back to the size of events like we had before? Maybe yes, but it may take a few years. But I think that's still a fundamental component, because trust building, for example, it's harder to do online. It's not impossible, but it's different. So I'm not one that's advocating the death by any means of physical events. If anything, I think they're going to be more powerful because we'll yearn for that more and more, because we haven't had those experiences in the past few months.
On the other hand, online events have brought in new added values that some of us knew they were there. We were just trying to test them, and clients were reluctant to make the big step. The past few months, clients have made the big step and have joined us into. But online events have shown us as well much more value that we just saw the tip of the iceberg of it. What do you think about the added values that this has given to us?
Yeah, as I mentioned already just in my previous response, if we think about scalability, it's a huge one. I mean, we're breaking down geographical barriers here. It brings different types of opportunities or business models depending on the type of event. It attracts maybe different types of sponsors. It attracts individuals, for example, who are not able to join those live events. So all of that in terms of opportunities, that geographical borders have been broken down from a digital point of view. Some of those creative elements you mentioned, like holograms and so on. Okay, you can do that in a physical space too, but it lends itself to a different type of experience. So there's many different types of value there. Also personalization. With digital, you can personalize. If we think about artificial intelligence, for example, we're already experimenting with artificial intelligence and platforms. How can you take content and personalize it so that it's relevant for each individual that's engaging with the online experience? Now, that is extremely powerful, because if you think about digital, this is exactly how our consumer habits have been shaped for the past few years. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, and we have to, as organizations, also map and align what we do as a strategy towards our consumer trends and tastes and behaviors. And I think digital allows us to do that, Hugo.
What was very much in the news yesterday in Belgium here is about the new app that is planned to come on the market. People are very hesitant to do this. And us in our industry, we have GDPR that we have to live up to. How has digital changed the scene for GDPR as well?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's a tricky one, right? There's a lot of sensitivity around data, and quite rightly so. But I think we're all, as individuals now with GDPR, giving us the power to opt in or opt out. And I think that's the whole point, is giving us the choice, whereas in the past, maybe it was a given that we didn't have that choice, and data was being extracted, it's being used without our knowledge, etc. I think now with things like GDPR and how organizations are far more sensitive with what they do with the data, there are regulations in place. And I think, once again, the whole concept of opting in and opting out, that's extremely important. We need to have choice with what people are doing, what they're capturing, and what they're doing with our data. And I think that's what we didn't have in the past. I think, that was controlled by other organizations, for example. Now I think we have far more control over what is happening with our data, and choosing whether or not that the data can be shared or even captured in the first place, Hugo?
Okay. Well, finally, just a statement, and we will come back to this later in this session. Is about learning. Learning is really critical and enabler for events, and there's new skills that meeting planners 2021 will need to learn. But we will talk about this later on. Last week, I read a report from McKinsey briefing now. There was 3 major things that were said in that. First of all, that consumers are returning back to the big brands that they know, that trust. People are in a very insecure environment for the moment, so they go to things that they know and things that they trust. Secondly, McKinsey said there's a lot of small businesses out there, and especially in our industry, 1.4 million to 2.1 million that could close permanently as a result of the past 4 months. And we're not even through the whole COVID campaign yet, so it's going to take longer. And there's a lot of those small businesses in our industry, a lot of our suppliers to our industry. And then there's big changes in accommodation and food services for sure. They are the biggest segment that was affected in the short term, followed by business services and transportation. Accommodation takes me to our next speaker this morning, and I would like to click through. Can somebody click through to the next slide, please? And unmute Stefan. Good, Stefan. I called your session the fear factor.
Thank you.
People are afraid to travel. People are afraid to move, definitely to sit in planes and go to hotels and sit in restaurants next to and in bars and so forth. This whole COVID-19 has had a lot of influence on what you're doing in your industry. Can you take us through this, please?
Thank you, Hugo.
Can we go to the next slide as well?
Yeah, thank you. First, AWC, we're the largest hotel investor in Thailand. We also have overseas properties, but in Thailand, we are the largest hotel operator. We do own hotels under Marriott, IHG, Banyan Tree, Hilton, Okura. So just to tell you a little bit who we are, and we obviously see this from pretty high up perception about where this is going, what we see from the governments, what we see from international institutions, what we see from hotel operators, how do they react to this? First of all, we do see there's quite some contradicting projections on the recovery process. We're going from global assessments of saying this is going to take 2 years, then we're going to governments who make their projections, we're going to operators who make their assumptions. In reality, and then we have organizations like PATA, which is actually foreseeing for Asia a growth between 5 and 9% for next year, because they say there's going to be more short-haul traveling. So that means Asians will travel more in Asia than they will go in long haul. So there's a lot of assumptions being made about how this is going. The reality is, except for what we see now, what's happening in China with the recovery, nobody has a real script about how the recovery process will be. It will depend on the local market. It will depend on the business mix. It will depend on government support. We have one of our resorts that opened 3-4 weeks ago. It's running close to 80% occupancy. It's doing actually better than last year. So just to show that we are in an environment where nobody knows, the airlines as well is a part of that. In short, one thing we do know is that there will be more regional traveling. People are afraid to travel long haul because this will also be linked to the airlift capabilities of the large airlines. How fast can they recover? How fast can they start seeing a business model again? It's nice to say the airlines can fly only for a few people, but that's not a business model for them. Then there will be also the hygiene concerns, which we see a lot of people have some concerns about how do I feel about all the hygiene around. Then we have, of course, a lot of governments which are introducing all kind of fiscal supports on leisure, business, MICE. And in our case, from Thailand, which is a net receiving country when it comes to tourism, don't forget there's countries which are net receiving and net giving countries. So that also makes a whole difference about the position of a country. If countries like in Southern Europe or like Thailand, they are net receiving countries when it comes to tourism or traveling. So they're more demanding and they're more open to that. Then, of course, what we do see is that there's significant health and safety initiatives by government, but also by large operators that we see. And they all try to associate themselves with large global players when it comes to hygiene, the likes of Ecolab or Dettol, to get some recognition. And I guess this is what already was mentioned, the larger brands, which obviously have a recognition for being more hygienic or having higher brand standards, also do benefit from that, because the hygiene protocols in the large brands are being perceived as being higher. So all in all, we do see this whole, we do see some benefits for the larger brands, because rather than before you go into some smaller hotels, smaller operators, smaller MICE facilities, we do see that having the brand and the brand recognition will definitely help. We also want to make, we also see that some of these initiatives definitely will be permanent, but a lot of them will also be temporary. We also see there's huge differences between countries. Like if you're speaking with Hong Kong, social distancing is definitely a different word when it means in rural Thailand or in rural places around the world. So we need to make sure is that a lot of the business models around the world are built around given when it comes to revenue per square meter, and that we cannot ignore. If you say they're going to take out 1 seat per plane, or social distancing in a plane long term, I don't think this will be working, because the business model is not built around that. The same for hotels, the same for, I think, for meetings. So another thing that we do see is that there's going to be an enormous change in the distribution channels and the landscaping of distribution channel. And also, and I think that's for the branded players, in some countries, you do have a big part which is unlicensed players or low-end players. And these ones will have a much more difficult time to recover after the COVID. So somehow we can see that after the crisis and the recovery, some of the stronger brands and some of the stronger players will have it easier to basically recover. I mean, one thing we also see very clearly is there's an acceleration when everything is digital and virtual. I think we spoke already about that. That both goes from booking, but also having the mixed use of having face-to-face and virtual meetings, which is opening a lot of possibilities in the future, like having 30,000 or why not 300,000 or 3 million people participating in a conference globally. And we're coming back, the next part is a little bit on what I just mentioned, is that there will be a huge change in customer needs, but all customers' behavior. Also, when it comes to meeting, working, and social behavior, we all have been used to work from home. What will be the use of an office space? Most of our companies that we see reduce office space. Can hotels take a more active role in becoming a social environment where people meet and greet and entertain and socialize? So that's something that will be a whole redefinition about what will happen in the future. One thing we are sure is that in the end, there will be winners of this COVID and there will be losers after this one. There's going to be new opportunities, and I think innovation will definitely have a big acceleration. We all are being pushed out of our comfort zone, and going back and defending yourself and shutting down is definitely not the way that we see it. We go actually on the offense. Our activities and our work speed has doubled since it. I think you're going to see a lot of changes in behavior, but I think we should not be afraid of this. It is a reality. The same way when email was invented, people thought that there would be no more meetings and networking. I think it's just the contrary. As we were saying before, people want to meet people, and if you even if you see people less in your daily office life, the need of meeting people will even be bigger outside this environment. So we do see a lot of opportunities. Being a digital, efficiency also becomes very high on the agenda. Everything which is hands-free, obviously, and again, this is all the new world that we're going to live in. So that's a little bit in short what we do see from our side, Hugo.
Yeah, mute myself. Yeah, that's clear, and basically you have already answered some of the questions that I had. So that's very good. I have a particular question in redefining space. we talked about it briefly, but does this mean that hotel operators, convention centers, and so forth, who look into the future, will need to look at redefining space, redesigning space, public space, meeting space, and so forth? What do you see in that
I mean,
segment?
we definitely see that a lot of the companies are reducing already with the working from home. Everybody feels more comfortable having a meeting through Teams or through Zoom than 6 months ago. We have been thrown into that new environment, the digital environment, even for the people who might in the past never have bought or done anything online. So as I mentioned, every change has opportunities, has winners and losers. We do believe that this new environment is enabling to hotels to reposition themselves as social areas where you can combine can combine offices and meeting zone and socializing a little bit. We launched last week here in Bangkok, amongst all our hotels, cross-branding. We launched something which is actually allowing members of this new environment to use all the club lounges, to use the business centers in our hotels together with meeting rooms. So again, do you really need a physical office today with laptops and iPads and so on? I think a lot has to do with habits. So yes, we do see that there's going to be a new reality. Now, what is going to look like? We don't have a crystal ball, but we definitely feel that there's something going to happen, and companies will change their behavior. And of course, speaking with some of the large companies around here in Thailand, actually they already shown extreme strong interest in the model that we launched, because it can also reduce their cost and show more flexibility and work-life balance for their employees.
Mm. But aren't we turning at the moment? Aren't we turning ballrooms and banqueting rooms into TV studios? Because that's the space that meeting planners need now. Does that change anything to the physical appearance of a conference room or a banqueting room?
Well, we had meetings with the large operators, with the Marriotts. As I say, we own the Marriott Marquis here in Bangkok. They think it's still a bit too early to make strong assessments. Yes, we're going to have some cameras and so on in the smaller meeting rooms, but I think we need to wait another few months to make a clear assessment how this is moving. But definitely, if you ask me personally now, yes, I do believe there's going to be more cameras and integrated virtual real-time meetings. But we will need to see how this is going to happen when people need to fly, when people need to stay in hotels. As I mentioned, our main business in hotels is accommodation, is not only meetings. So it all has to fit together how we do that. But if you now have speakers that can speak from any part in the world to any part of to a larger base, it offers a lot of opportunities, I would say. Changing meeting rooms today, not yet, because a lot of these services we subcontract. What we see now, a lot of the contractors with who we work, they obviously make sure that they have all these facilities available. I would say let's see a few more months to see how this will go. But definitely, I do believe this is one possible direction.
Okay. Checklist. When you take, and we all fly a lot, pilots use checklists all the time, and event management companies like MCI have their checklist and have their health and safety checklist. These checklists have been expanded into COVID checklists as well. Mm-hmm. Does this help operators like hoteliers to do business with us, or does it even complicate it more?
No, as I mentioned, all the large hotel operators, they have the same checklist, I guess, that MCI has. So I don't think there's a huge difference. You go through the same kind of protocols about checking the temperature, checking the hygiene standards. I mean, this morning I flew from Bangkok to Chiang Mai. I think by the time I was in the plane, I already had been measured 7 times my temperature. So I think a lot of the places we see, there's a lot of similar initiatives now. I do believe some of them will go away, but some of them, like the hygiene, like the gels and so on, might stay. I mean, if you're walking around the whole day and shaking the hands of 200 people, maybe it's time from time to time you need to disinfect your hands.
Good. Well, we are halfway of today's session. Let's go to the next slide, please. I think we can click through. Well, that's. You can receive a copy of the presentation here, and we have made the PDF version available. So this will be in it, but Stefan covered most of these points. Let's go to the next slide, because from my side it doesn't work. And the next slide again. Next one. Right. This is something that we have that we are dealing with. I think not only in Europe. I had actually a conversation with our Minister of Tourism last night about this topic, where people in leadership, people in government see events more as private events, public events, and so forth. And our events industry hasn't been heard enough, we believe. Belgium, they heard us, and they then together with the industry we created the COVID CERM model. In Germany, they made an analysis, and here you can see that 88.55% of all the events in Germany are actually business events. They're not public events, they're not cultural events, they're not sports, it's business events. And the same thing I saw in the press yesterday in the UK, for instance, where governments do not understand who we are. David, what have we done wrong?
Hugo, before we get there, I think there's two nice questions in the Q&A section for Stefan. One relates to hotel rates, and the other one is the cost of the safety and so on. Maybe before we move on from Stefan, he could just quickly answer those two.
There's a question for me, I guess. So, I mean, yes, there has been some additional health and safety implications of that. Are they dramatic? No, I mean, there's obviously some additional cost, but I think if you're looking as well, that what's happening in all the hotels is that we have been able to reduce some of the cost as well. I mean, as mentioned, customers' behavior is changing. So some of the costs that we had, we have been able to reduce as well. So I don't think it's a big impact. I mean, yes, if you're looking at the global numbers, they say 3 billion, 9 billion. I don't know which number is right. But if you put gels, like you put soap in the toilets, are you really going to are you going to increase your overheads with 30%? Yes, we had to do some smaller capex investments like soap dispensers and so on. But let me be honest, this is not like you're not going to ruin the bank or your capex with that. We have been able to postpone some other capexes which were more expensive than that. So I don't see it as a main cost of that. And then the rates, obviously we are in the business of supply and demand. I think today, if you go around the world, you find very attractive pricing. Maybe it's a reset to zero about where the prices were getting too high. So can we make it more affordable? The same you see with the airlines, the same with the hotels. We obviously want to work together. And again, we're in the business of supply and demand. We obviously have our basic costs that we need to cover, like anyone else. But we can be more affordable if there's less demand, for sure.
Awesome. So Hugo, back to your question. And Stefan, before I let you off the hook, I'm an incentive guy. So what I need from you for our audience is a fantastic night and a bed and breakfast package in one of your great hotels. And I want to use it as an incentive for audience engagement. We've got 331 people on the line. And could I ask you for something like that to offer as a prize for the audience?
For a prize, of course, we can offer some prize, no problem. I'll give me a few minutes and I'll think about something nice.
Thank you.
Can I apply?
All right. Yes, Avinash. And
okay.
There may be one for the best speaker, and I think Avinash might get that one. Anyway, So, hello
Can
to
I
the
just ask
audience.
the next slide, please? Because there's something
Yeah,
wrong from my side. I can't move. Yeah, okay.
great.
I think that's the new normal.
So, yeah, so
David, sorry.
you want to lead, Hugo?
Hmm. We're in a new normal situation. A lot has changed in meetings and events, and as well in the design of incentive travel. The questions we must ask here: what customer experience are we seeking? How can we scale this on a global level, and what business metrics are we trying to drive? That's all before starting on a digital project. Some of the questions that the companies must ask themselves. What do you see? Because you're working more on the client side of our industry. What changes do you see coming next?
Sure, and I think, you know, you led with this question about our industry and the importance of it, and the relationship between the incentive travel or the business travel experience and politicians. I think there's a lot to be said about that, but you know, the whole realm of digital versus incentive travel, well, it's very interesting to have a future think about that. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about virtual reality incentive experiences, which may or may not be ready yet, but certainly if you look at some of those futuristic movies way into the future where people go into an experience room and they have different types of experience, could that be the future of incentive travel? Well, I certainly hope not, because I think the authentic, real experience of going to a destination, meeting different cultures, interfacing with different parts of our beautiful planet, understanding history, geography, the whole experience around traveling is a life-enriching experience, and I certainly believe that it's still going to be part of the future, but we cannot discount the fact that the virtual, the digital experience is on the rise, and it's not going to stop. So we are going to see a future that looks very different. And of course, from a generational point of view, my kids are online all the time, and their world is filled with digital experiences. So their appetite for travel in the future might be very different to our type of generation. And we also need to think about that in context.
What does that mean for our teams? So we need to upskill, reskill them? Do we need to, are new professions being invented for the moment, or existing professions that are coming into our industry? What do you see this for your own team?
Absolutely, Hugo, 100%. And I think that dovetails on Stefan's point that there are going to be winners and losers, but there are also going to be tremendous new opportunities. And I think for the tremendous amount of disruption that this has caused, and we can't avoid that or put our head in the sand on that one. Millions of people are losing jobs or in the process of losing jobs, and it's a pretty dark moment in our global industry. But we can't lose hope, and we have to reskill and we have to rethink. And that opportunity, in fact, is a very exciting one. And I want to encourage all the people on the call today, if you're in a tough place or being furloughed or looking at it and demanding a new change in direction for your career, this is a tremendous opportunity to do that and remodel and rethink and be purposeful about how you move forward.
There's one more thing when we're going digital, and Avinash already touched upon this. It's all the data that we gather now, and with the words of Winston Churchill, "Never waste a good crisis." There's a big data breakthrough for events. That includes new professions as well, because I don't see traditional meeting planners understanding the digital ways of data and how to handle that. Do you and Avinash want to comment on that?
Sure, but I just want to put out a question for our audience, and I hope they're still engaged and listening. And this might be the opportunity to, I want to hear from the participants. Are you reskilling yourselves? Do you think it's something that you need to onboard in this moment in time? And please put your comments in the Q&A so we can just see. Tell us what industry you are in and what adaptations, and let's see, we'll pick a nice
David, I think that's a good
that.
question. I think the whole thing of which particular skills do you feel you're lacking right now in your particular jobs that needs to be aligned to the world we're living in today? What are those skills? What is that knowledge gap you have? So I think that would be great to see.
I mean, Avinash, you head of learning for a big organization. What are some of the things that you're bringing in as new learnings?
There's a lot going on, right? If we think about the whole concept of virtual event design itself, it's probably the biggest change. It's different from physical event design. That whole concept of interaction, engagement online is so different. And there's quite some knowledge gap there. It's also the types of technology that you use and the formats that you need to understand. So this is what we do call upskilling. Upskilling is when you're in the same job function, but you need to learn new skills that's adapted to the current environment. Reskilling is when you have to learn something completely different. So most people are in the current upskilling phase. They're not moving jobs, which will be reskilling, for example, right? If they want to move out. So other kinds of things, David and Hugo and Stefan, what's going on is in the events world, of course, you've got, monetization. How do you look at, the business models, for example? What are the ways we can earn money in a different way? Because the price modeling is completely different. There's the whole concept of data that was brought up by Hugo as well, data analytics, which is not necessarily the forte of any particular event or meeting planner. And then there's a whole area of, I would say, how to deal with stress. In our world, that's going to happen when the events come back in terms of the hybrid model as a first phase. How do you deal with the stress of people coming to events, the health and hygiene checks? All of these will require different types of skill sets.
For sure. And, Hugo, from our organization point of view, where the incentive travel outbound planning has kind of ground to a zero. Of course, we still have a lot of interaction with clients wanting to sort of reshift plan for the future. But right now, we've got a lot of travel planners that should have been on multiple trips all over the world, looking after customers, flying here, there, and doing site inspections and all sorts of things. They are, they're in a very stressed environment because the core functionality of their whole work being has sort of been, completely downsized, and they're needing to find something else to do and start to have different conversations with the same customers about meeting a need. People still need to be motivated and driven towards results. And that's what incentive travel is about. It's about creating business results. So if we can't travel, what else can we do? And it's shifting that conversation, possibly using the same or a similar budget for something else, and finding that pathway to success for meeting the client's needs. So for our organization, we are, we're very busy in finding those new pathways, the new conversations. And it is exciting, but it's also quite scary and daunting for people that have been used to doing a one-dimensional sort of role and now having to take on new stuff. And I think
people have suffered a lot in the last few months, and people have worked hard as well. And somewhere they still earn the recognition. They must be, the organization will want to thank them. Organization will want to reward them, and they're expecting that as well. So I think incentive travel as a business tool is definitely at its place now. Unfortunately, very often it's one of the first things that is cut out of a budget, which is very strange, because it's the opposite effect.
For sure. And, you know, it is part of remuneration. So if you're not able to go on a wonderful trip to Singapore, like I have had a big insurance client that was supposed to travel to Singapore in May, the value of that trip is quite substantial to the individual. And of course, there's certain tiers where the individual are able to bring their partner along as part of the rewards package. And they kind of turned back to the business and said, well, now what that we're not traveling, where's that value add, you know, and how do we get compensated? So it's close, incentive travel is closely linked to remuneration and compensation, but it's a different piece. So to your point, that's certainly there. And our clients are adopting the postpone, not cancel kind of approach. But now we're moving, because this has taken so long, we're moving into a new financial year. So we kind of, the losses in this financial year are now being rolled into the new financial year. And of course, that budget doesn't double for next year. So that's a huge value loss to our industry.
Good. We have about 8 minutes left to this this online event. We have some questions in the chat box there. There's a question on the issue of event space. There's clearly an expectation, and rightly so, that bigger spaces are offered due to safety. All of a sudden, a ballroom which may cater for 1,000 can now only cater for 100 to 150 people. How will the lost revenue be achieved? Who wants to answer that question?
Hugo, sorry, I was not sure microphone was on. We do believe that the social distancing will not be something which will be continue for a long time. I think social distancing will fade out. As I mentioned before, social distancing, we would need to relook at any business model around many places. I mean, airlines, hotels, ballrooms, to restaurants, to justify this now. This will be something of, if this would happen, it would be something on a very long haul to look at. As speaking with the large operators, as we have around 20 hotels in different phases of development, we ask them, and they do not see this as a long-term impact on the social distancing. So we do believe that the ballroom of 1,000 will be able to serve again as 1,000. No, maybe not within the next 3 months, but maybe within whenever everybody says the vaccine is found, or whenever we all feel comfortable. For example, in Thailand, we already have no new cases since 41 days, I believe, local cases. So you do already see that social distancing is slowly disappearing when you go to marketplaces and so on. So
we have a question about capacity as well. Somebody's asking a question about the capacity of airlines, because airlines are now flying again, countries are opening up again. Suddenly there's a big surge on airline tickets, prices are going high, and seats are few. Isn't that stopping some of the immediate recovery that we are seeing in our industry for Q4, sorry, not Q8. David?
I'm here. Sorry, I was just busy looking at the questions in the that the participants have put together. And I didn't hear your question. Sorry.
So the question was about just one of those questions that I saw in the chat box is about capacity. Airline seats are becoming scarce in the Q4.
Yeah, sure.
You see that as well?
I did see that one. I think the capacity issue is not going to be a long-term problem, especially for outbound incentive travel things. Yes, there is going to be a high pent-up demand for individual travelers, but I think the upside of the pent-up demand to travel is the reality in the world today with the economic crisis as it is. People are not going to be spending money willy-nilly on travel necessarily. There are going to be other needs to take care of, like school fees and rental, and things like that. So being able to travel as a reward is going to become more desirable, I believe. If you could earn an incentive travel prize as part of your company paying for it, that's going to be very valuable in time. It doesn't quite answer the question on capacity, but I don't think capacity is going to be a massive problem.
Yeah. We have another question here that in the 80s and 90s, individual incentive travel was used as a reward, recipient, partner, even family. It wasn't always about camaraderie, team building, or gala awards dinner. Will we see an upsurge of individual incentive travel again?
Yeah, I believe so. And I also think that there could be a move away from big crowded city incentive travel to a more eco-styled retreat, safer places, as it were. So maybe smaller groups, yes, the individual thing, but you don't quite capture the camaraderie in individual space, and it also doesn't match the need of senior executives to interface with their top achievers. So yeah, I think it's going to be there, but I don't think it's overplayed. I don't think the demand for individual incentive travel is going to be as big as one might think.
Okay, there's a question about upskilling. Is when you have staff employees that have, wait a second, have staff that have been in the industry as industry veterans, do not want to upskill themselves and are stubborn to do so. How would you address this? To let them go and find new younger candidates, or what would be suggested? I think Avinash, you can answer to that.
It's a very good question. It's a very tough one, actually, and we've seen that happen at different parts of people's careers as they reach a plateau. And I think this is also showing the case with COVID in terms of what people are comfortable with and where the knowledge gaps are. So it's a very tough one for a business and leadership to decide on this, because of course people have been giving a lot for many years, but the environment has changed. And indeed, if those people that are reluctant and stubborn to change, I'm afraid maybe it's time for them to be reskilling. That's the difference between upskilling versus reskilling. Reskilling is to do something else that can still work for them, but it may not be in the same position anymore because things have moved on when it comes to digital. So can an organization wait long enough to keep those people? That's the question. Because maybe if things go back to what we call the traditional way of physical events, then ultimately those people, for example, have a job to play, a role to play. But I mean, what's the consequence of if they wait around? So I think it's a very tough call. I think every business has to make that decision. Every HR department has to make that decision. But I think from someone like myself, I think upskilling is extremely important. Always, continuous learning is always important. Reinvention is important according to the environment that we work in and that we have to deal with every day. No easy answer.
No. And I was reading an article from one of our colleagues from Brazil that said we now have data professionals, UX designers, digital education experts. These are all new professions that, I mean,
that's correct.
It's difficult to upskill. This is completely reskill.
It's not impossible, and we've got to know where we can and where you need to hire. So the question is, what do you develop in-house and within, and people that have the intrinsic motivation to grow and develop those skills, versus what do you need to hire that may not exist. So you have to find that balance as well.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, so I have one last question here. Most events turn to virtual or hybrid. Some corporates can organize the virtual events by themselves. No need to hire the organizer. What are your views on this?
Well, I think, let me jump in here. I think, yes, corporates are going to be very adept to using tools like this. So it's not necessarily about the basics around digital meetings and events. What we've got to produce is excellence in the creative space, and using the neurosciences that Avinash was talking about to bring in expert levels of added value onto a meeting. It's not just setting up the Zoom call and the breakout rooms and the things like that. It's really going above and beyond. Otherwise, you know, yeah. So there's that. That's my point.
Yeah, the technology is a channel. It's an enabler. It's a cliche now, but it's a reality. So yes, a lot of organizations are saying we can do it ourselves, but what they're doing now is they're realizing the experience and the ROI is not as strong as it needs to be. And that's where the experience that David's talking about is so critical. So you do need expertise behind creating the right experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stefan, last observation from you. What would you recommend people in your space to do that maybe they haven't done so yet?
Well, I think everybody sits, of course, a little bit scared, not knowing what's going to happen. But like anything, you either see it as something scary, either as a challenge. And we're all sitting in the same boat. I'm a cyclist, and when I see when I'm suffering, I look to the guy next to me and I say, well, he's suffering as much as I have, so I have to push a little harder to be the first one. So it's a little bit it's your state of mind. We all have to adjust. We're all sitting in this new environment, and the one who cannot adapt, he will die. So I think we're going to complete redefinition when it goes to customer experience, when it comes to distribution, when it comes to a lot of things we don't even realize today. If you're looking at the head of Airbnb was saying, the company was destroyed in 6 to 8 weeks, where we built 10 years to build it up. And there's more businesses like that. I mean, I do believe we're at the beginning of a new environment. Now, how the new environment will look like, I don't know, but we own the hotels, so we have, like our owner says, we have the real assets, so we we can survive with that. Just to come back on what David's saying, I want to give some 2 weekends away in any of our hotels in Bangkok, being the Athénée, the Marriott, the Hilton, Okura, or the Meridian. So I leave it to you, Hugo, to distribute or to do some prizes or some competition. I don't know how you want to do this.
Okay, we'll come up with something after this call.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, David, for the suggestion. Avinash, thank you for your views, as always, very clear. We would like to thank everybody. I read an article just a week ago as well from Carl Honoré, the guy who wrote the book in praise of the slow movement. And here's a quote actually from Carl Honoré: "The constant pressure to do everything faster means we race through life instead of actually living it. When you use the slow gear, everything falls into place. You connect more, you create more, you focus more, and you achieve more. We have seen some of that. My question is, what will we do tomorrow? When all this is over, will we still be in this slow movement, or are we going back to the rat race?" And that's a big question to ask. I would like to thank everybody who joined this call today. Thank TTG for the invitation. As this picture shows, we're all in this together, and please reach out to us, to the speakers after the call, if you want more clarification, more personal questions. We'll be happy to answer those. Thank you to all, and hope to meet you soon again, probably in the real world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Hugo.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you to Hugo, David, Avinash, and Stephen for that insightful discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being here with us today. So before you leave, do take a minute to fill in the quick poll that is going to be on screen. Have a good day, and we look forward to having you join us at our next TTG Conversations.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.